be with you tonight. Let us get into God's word together. Let's agree in prayer. Let's agree in prayer. Well, Father, in the name of the Lord Jesus, we will lend our spirits to the Spirit of the living God within us, that out through the vessel of our being, you pour forth your wisdom with mighty clarity. Father, we will thank you for we have wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of that Spirit that you've so richly given to us in redemption. Father, we believe and we receive that the burden of ignorance is dematerialized to your glory, and everybody says amen. Okay, then we continue tonight on our studies on concerning the fulfillment of prophecy. Okay, so concerning the fulfillment of prophecy, I want you to observe the following as we border tonight in our study. Okay, so we're going to go further tonight in our study, and I invite you along to feed and feast on the Word of God together with us. Okay, so we're examining quite an important topic or theme that you see all throughout God's Word, right? So come with me if you can, because we are looking at the fulfillment of prophecy. Come with me to Isaiah and chapter 30, right? Isaiah and chapter 30, and we are in verse 1. Isaiah and chapter 30, and I'm going to verse 1. Look at what it says. Isaiah, did I say 30? I meant to say 38. Isaiah chapter 38 and verse 1. Look at what it says. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. Okay, so Hezekiah, right, is carrying a sickness, right? So if you took him to a hospital, the hospital would declare him terminally ill. So Hezekiah is terminally ill already. It says, and we then read in verse 1, Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came unto him and said unto him, thus saith the Lord, set your house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. So again, the question to ask ourselves is, Isaiah, look at Isaiah's prophecy. Prophecy says, thou shalt die and not live. That seems fairly obvious, guys, right? But again, you look at what do those words mean? How should such words be received? Number one, it's a personal prophecy, right? It's a personal prophecy, right? It's within the realm of Hezekiah's life, right? So it is Hezekiah's life that is being discussed. Yeah, it's within the realm of Hezekiah's life, and so we already know instinctively it will have something to do with Hezekiah's choices. Yes. So, but let's look at this together, right? Like we are looking at the role that Hezekiah's choices plays in what was said. Look at verse 2. Then Hezekiah turned his face. So when Hezekiah heard Isaiah, right, Hezekiah took that as an inspiration to turn to God. Right, so Hezekiah was inspired to turn to God. Well, before that, Hezekiah had been focused on the disease. Yeah, he had been focused on the disease. Now he turns to God. Then we see all that. Look at verse 4. Then came the word of the Lord. Then means as a result of what Hezekiah just did in verse 2, right, and verse 3. So in Isaiah 38:4, when it says then, right, it is telling us about a consequence. So there's a consequence that followed from Hezekiah's praying, Hezekiah's talking, Hezekiah's engaging God. So we read, it says then, right, that's Isaiah 38:4, then came the word of the Lord to Isaiah. So what's the point? Is the Lord for Hezekiah's death, or is the Lord for Hezekiah's being alive? Yeah. So we see then. So then now Isaiah, right, is sent with new words. So he's sent with new words to Hezekiah. Look at that very carefully. So Isaiah is sent with new words to Hezekiah. So this is quite interesting, because what does that tell us? It tells us something that is quite instructive for us, right? And what it tells us is this: when Hezekiah talks to God, Hezekiah's words, right, will become what influences the prophecy that Isaiah comes to give. So Hezekiah's interaction with God, okay, influences, right, what Isaiah, right, is sent to tell Hezekiah. Do you get it now? So in other words, what Isaiah will tell Hezekiah is not fixed. Let me say that one more time, right? So one more time. So we see that Hezekiah turned to God, interacted with God, spoke with God. God said some things to Hezekiah. Those words that God said to Hezekiah became the things that influenced what Isaiah will be sent to tell Hezekiah again. So it means that the words that Isaiah speaks to Hezekiah are not fixed. You see now? One more time. So the words that Isaiah, speaks to Hezekiah are not cast in stone. You get it now? Let me see one more time. The words that Isaiah speaks to Hezekiah are not cast in stone. There's something about Hezekiah's actions, okay, influencing Isaiah's prophecy. Yeah. So it will influence Isaiah's prophecy. What does that tell us? It means that Isaiah's prophecy helps us understand Hezekiah's state. Yeah. So Isaiah's prophecy is a measure, okay, or a description. So it describes Hezekiah's state. So where is Hezekiah? That's all that we should learn from Isaiah's prophecy. Is that clear? So God sent messenger to Hezekiah. Messenger, that's Isaiah, says to Hezekiah, set your house in order, you will die, you will not live. But then Hezekiah understands. So, we've been looking at understanding is critical when it comes to making sense of the words of prophecy. Understanding is critical. So, Hezekiah understood God. Yes. So Hezekiah understood God, understood the words. Yeah. So he understood God and the words that God sends. Let me say one more time. Hezekiah understood two things: God and the words that God sent. He knew that those words were to steer Hezekiah to receive from God. Right? So the words spoken, right, were to steer Hezekiah, right, to receive healing from God. That is, my dear friend, extremely important. So, in other words, what Isaiah tells Hezekiah is not predetermined somewhere in some invisible dimension and having nothing to do with Hezekiah. In other words, right, you are to interact with the prophecy that you receive. So you are to interact with the prophecy, okay? We are to engage God, okay? That's what we are learning. We are to engage God who sends men, okay? So we are to engage God who sends men, and we are to pray, okay? So we are to pray. No personal prophecy. I said that again. No personal prophecy is fatalistic. None. No personal prophecy is deterministic. In other words, there's no personal prophecy that is spoken that we are to understand to be, no matter what you do, what will be, it is sorted. That's why you are being told. No. Yeah. So in other words, what it will mean that is that the words of personal prophecy are often a revelation. You see, so the words, right, of personal prophecy, right, are a revelation, okay, and not a prediction. Do you understand? Let me say one more time. So when Isaiah came in Isaiah 38 verse 1 and said, you will die. Yeah. So in other words, Isaiah's words, let me say one more time. Isaiah's words, right, that Hezekiah will die and not live, They are not a prediction. It's not foretelling. Yeah. So I need to say that one more time. Although Isaiah said, "Set your house in order, you will die and not live." Those words that Isaiah spoke to Ezekiah, right? They are not soothsaying. They are not predictions. Yeah. So they are not a prediction of the future, although they look like that. Rather, right, they are a revelation. They show Ezekiah where things are. Yeah. So those words, right, they show, they reveal, right, they unmask, they make plain. Yeah. So they are marks to Ezekiah, right, the consequence of choices. Okay. So it helps a man understand the consequence of choices. Then a man that knows that it is revelation, not prediction, right? So that's Ezekiah's beauty. Ezekiah understood that these words, okay, he understood that, oh, the words are revelation. And this is important. You understand the words are revelation and not prediction. And the moment they are not prediction, it means it's not like they are set in stone and they must happen. So what does he do? Ezekiah then, he takes new actions. Yeah, he takes new actions. Why? To drive new outcomes. You see? So to drive new outcomes. Anyway, enough said. Enough said. Now, in fact, if you go to that Isaiah 38, come with me to Isaiah 38 again, and look at what in verse 5. Go, say to Ezekiah, thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears. Behold, I will add unto thy days 15 years. Right? So I will add unto that. So that Isaiah 38:5 is also not set in stone. Right? It is not set in stone. Yeah, Ezekiah must still receive it. Yeah, so Ezekiah must receive, yeah, God's deliverance. So God will deliver him from sickness. Ezekiah must receive it. Now, for example, Ezekiah, he could jump right from the top of the palace. He will die. That will happen. He will die. But somebody says, God said, I will deliver him. That is God's intention. But there will be man's reception of God's intention. So, in other words, man's action, right, receives the fulfillment. Okay? Receives the fulfillment of prophecy. Is that clear? Anyway, let's go on then. Let's go to Acts and chapter 27. Acts and chapter 27. Yeah, in our studies tonight. Acts, look at chapter 27 with me. Yeah, the book of Acts and chapter 27. Right, I want you to observe what Acts chapter 27 actually says. Right, so come with me to this is in the life of Paul. So Acts 27, yeah, and we're going to go on to Acts 27. I'm coming. Look at verse 10. Yes, Acts 27. Yeah, Acts 27. Look at it. Let me read from verse 1. Acts chapter 27 and verse 1. What do we see? What do we see in verse 1? Because that will help us set the tone. It says, and when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius. Look at that. So they delivered Paul unto somebody named Julius. And what was Julius? It says a centurion of the Augustus band. So there's Paul, and then there's a centurion, right, whose name is Julius. Take note of that. So there's Paul, right, and he's not delivered unto and in verse 2, and entering into a ship, right? So so now we see Paul has entered a ship, right? There is a captain or centurion called Julius, and Paul is there. Now come with me to verse 10. Look at verse 10. Yeah, or look at verse 9. Yeah, Acts 27 and verse 9. Look at what verse 9 says. And when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. So who is speaking? In verse 9, Paul admonished. Okay? Now, that word admonish, right? It actually refers to a warning. Look at it. Paul admonished them. Now, so what did Paul do again? Paul admonished. I don't want you to lose sight of that. So we're in Acts, we're in chapter 27, and we are in verse 9, right? Acts 27 and verse 9. What is going on? Well, Paul is admonishing certain people. Well, so look at that word again, admonish. Yeah, what does the word admonish there? What does it mean? Well, the word admonish there, it's actually an advice. So a recommendation. Okay, so it's an advice, it's a recommendation, right? So Paul gave them a recommendation. He's recommending, is like a proposal, right? So he's recommending, right? He's proposing something. What did he propose? Well, look at the next verse. That'll be Acts 27 and verse 10. So we're about to read Paul's proposal. Well, let's read it. So Acts 27 and verse 10. What does it say? And said unto them, Sirs, I perceive, look at that. I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the laden and ship, but also of our lives. Look at that very carefully. So, in other words, Paul is speaking from a perception. That's like a prophecy of sorts. So, Paul is speaking, is giving an utterance, a proposal. Now, but this utterance is from Paul's perception. It says, I perceive. What did he perceive? Two things. Number one, there will be hurt and damage to the ship. So the ship will get damaged, right, on this journey. Yeah. So the ship will get damaged on this journey. Number two, human lives will be damaged on this journey. Is that clear? Now, that looks or sounds, right? That sounds like it is set in stone, right? So it looks like, oh, it is set in stone. On this journey, this ship is going to be wrecked, and lives are going to be damaged, destroyed. In other words, now that's what Paul said. Come down with me in Acts 27, and let's go to verse 21. Yeah, it says, but after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete. So in other words, right? From Acts 27, verse 21, Paul is saying, hey, when I gave those words, you should not have moved from Crete. Right? You should have stayed. That means men should have taken a particular action. Yes. So men should have taken, right, the action of not moving. Can you see now? So of not moving from that city. Yeah. So of not moving from that city. That is the action. In other words, the prophecy of Paul, right? The prophecy of Paul, yes, actually was to inspire an action. Let me say one more time. So the prophecy of Paul was to inspire. There was a correct way, yeah, was to inspire men to act. Now let's go on. It says in verse 21. After long abstinence, Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this arm and loss. So what does that tell us now? Right? It means that it is in the actions of men that men gained arm and loss. So let's go back then. So we can go back to what Paul said in Acts 27 and verse 10. Let's go back to verse 10, right? So in verse 10, when Paul said, I perceive, right, that this journey, this voyage will be with damage to the ship and to lives. What it means is, what it means is, if you ignore these words, and you act as you want to, right, then what it's saying is your action, right, of ignoring these words, okay, will cause you to gain harm. Will cause you to gain harm and loss. Loss of what? Of the sheep, and loss to the lives. Loss to sheep, right, and loss to lives. Look at that. So when Paul spoke, he said, I perceive in verse 10 that this voyage will be with much harm to the sheep and men. That looks like, men are going to be lost. But Paul now said in verse 21, right? Oh, you know what? You should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete. So what is Paul describing in that perception, right? So it means that Paul's perception, okay, is describing the outcome of men, the action of men, right? So it's describing the outcome of the action, right? The action of men. It is not describing the will of God. Yes. So although Paul perceived it, right? It does not convey God's will. Yes. So it doesn't mean that, God's will is that there's going to be harm and loss. That's not God's will. Yes. Get it right. So it wasn't God's will that men experience harm and loss. So why did Paul perceive it? So why did he perceive the prophecy? Well, he perceived it. It's in Acts 27 verse 21. Look at it again. 27 verse 21. It says, sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete. Can you see? In other words, it's God's plan, right? So God's intent was to prevent, follow me closely, was to prevent the harm and the loss. Okay? So was to prevent the harm and the loss by men, right, choosing to stay in Crete. You get it now? Although the prophecy said, I perceive that this journey will be with much harm to the sheep and lives. Somebody says, but it looked like it was written in the stars that it was going to happen. No. Look at it one more time, right? So Paul's perception, the wordings that was used to state it notwithstanding, the intention, Paul himself said his intention, right? So what we see then is that in Acts 27 verse 21, right, we see the thoughts of God, okay, about why God gave those perceptions for Paul, okay, to communicate, okay, so communicate to men. So Acts 27 verse 10, Paul's perception is not deterministic. It is not deterministic. Somebody says, I just perceive that there's danger coming. Now, that you perceived it does not mean it must happen. No, because in this case, actually, Paul helps us understand that after long abstinence, Paul stood, Acts 27 verse 21 now. Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed. Okay, so the words will look like, no matter what you do, there's going to be loss of lives, but in reality, what Paul is saying in Acts, if we use Acts 27 verse 21, right, to understand Acts 27 verse 10, you remember it's tsunami, right? So if we don't close our eyes, right? So in other words, if we don't close our eyes, That means if we have understanding, yeah. So if we have understanding, if there's a tsunami, a bringing together of words, what will then be is the perception is saying, don't ignore these words, right? Don't act from ignoring this perception, because if you do that, you will then gain harm and loss to the sheep and lives. So who is granting the loss, right? So who is granting the loss? Well, not God. Okay, actually, what is granting the loss is the actions of men. Yes. So what is granting the loss, right, is the actions, right, is the choices of men. Now let's go on. That's again then it means that when Paul says, yeah, come back to Acts 27 and or Acts 27 verse 21, after long abstinence Paul stood in the midst of them and said, sirs, right, you should have hearkened, look at that again, you should have hearkened unto me, right, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. What Paul then is saying is this: the loss was not destined, the harm was not destiny. The harm was actually like wet cement, right? It is like something that is not cast, it's not hardened, it's not formed, it is not something that must happen, but the choices of men can turn it from soft cement, so to speak, to hardened cement. When I say soft cement and hardened cement, what I'm talking about is it's an illustration. You can, it's like you are pouring cement into a mold. There's a point in time you can pour the cement. The more you leave the cement that way, it hardens. Now, what causes performance of prophecies is the action or inaction of men, the choices that men use to receive manifestation or to hinder manifestation. Yes, so men use their choices, okay, to hinder, right, or hasten manifestation, right, of prophecies. Okay, so in other words, don't take it that because a prophecy was spoken, then it has to come to pass. No, Paul is effectively saying that. Acts 27:21, right? He's saying, oh, guys, you should have listened to me. Yeah, so in other words, by the act of listening and by the act of cooperating with Paul's words, they would have avoided the loss of lives, or sorry, the loss of the loss that they have experienced as at that time. Anyway, so as at that time, we don't know whether they've lost lives or not, but there has been loss to the sheep and all that. Yeah, now, but let's go on. Let's go to verse 22, Acts 27:22. Listen very carefully, right? So after all that, Paul then gets up and says, now I exhort you to be of good cheer. So in Acts 27 and verse 22, Paul is prophesying again. Okay, Paul is prophesying again, right? And it says here, be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the sheep. What? Listen carefully. So, Acts 27, verse 22, right? What did Paul prophesy? He said, no loss of any man's life. Okay? Although there will be loss of the sheep. Okay? No loss of any man's life, but loss of the sheep. But look at Acts and chapter 27 and verse 10 again. Look at Acts 27 and verse 10. Verse 10 says, it says, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and the ship, but also of our lives. So in other words, hurt and damage, right, to ship and to lives, right? And then you now get to verse 22. It now says, no loss of any man's life. So which one is it? Well, what that tells you then is the words, okay, of the prophecy, okay, is outlining the activities, yeah, the actions of men. Yeah, is outlining the actions of men. It's talking about possibilities. It's talking about possibilities. So Paul is right. Paul is revealing. Let's put it that way. Is revealing or is showing right possibilities. Let me say it again. Is Paul is not predicting. He's not predicting. You see, if you're not careful, you will think surely, Sekou, at this point Paul is predicting. Okay, let's read on. Look at that verse. That verse 23. Yeah, look at what Paul continues to say now in verse 23. Observe Paul. In other words, Paul, why did you bring this new prophecy? Yes, so why this new prophecy, or where is it from? Yeah, so where is this new prophecy from? Are you following now? So where is this new prophecy from? We know the first one was from perception. Don't forget that Acts 27 and verse 10 prophecy, yes, was from perception. Yeah, now it was from perception. But look at this other one. Yeah, it says in verse 22, now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the sheep. No loss of life, but of the sheep. Now, for there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve. So, in other words, an angel had brought word to Paul, right? An angel. So, the angel of God had spoken. Yes, the angel of God had spoken to Paul. Yeah, so we are not talking about perception. Acts 27:10 is perception. What did the angel say to Paul? I want you to read it very carefully. Yes, it says there shall be no loss of any man's life, although loss of sheep will occur. Now, again, look at that. So we ask ourselves, why is Paul now speaking? It's obvious, so that there will be no loss of any man's life. Somebody says, no, 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 no. That's not it. Paul said there will be no loss. You have to learn to understand prophecy. Someone will insist, okay? Someone will insist that Paul guaranteed, yes? So Paul guaranteed that there will be no loss, yeah, of any man's life. Is that what Paul did? Well, we're going to let the Bible explain itself, right? So did Paul give guarantees? Was that what he was doing? In other words, was Paul predicting this? Yes. So was Paul predicting, right, that there shall be no loss of any man's life? Is that what was going on? Now, look at verse 24. It says, look at what the angel said. Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God had given thee all them that sail with thee. Look at that very carefully. God has given thee all them that sail with thee. I want you to pay attention to that statement. The angel told Paul, God has given you. Yeah. So these are the angel's words, right, to Paul. So make no mistake about it. The messenger can be men, and the messenger can be angels. Okay. So in this case, the angels' words to Paul were, God has given you all that sail with you. Remember. So all that sail with you will then be the owner of the ship, right? Owner of the ship, the centurion. Now, where you have centurion just simply means 100. Yeah, captain of 100. So if you have owner of the ship, you have centurion, then you'll have many soldiers, then you'll have the crew members. Yeah, you'll have the crew members, and you'll have people in Paul's team, or all of those. So God has given you all that sail with you. Yeah, he has given you all that sail with you. Look at verse 25. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. So I believe that it shall be as it was told me. Is Paul saying, right? So is Paul saying that, hey, no matter what, yeah, no matter what, right? There will be nobody who will die. Is that what Paul is saying? Yeah. So is Paul effectively saying that, well, the owner of the ship, the centurion, the many soldiers, the crew members, Paul's team, and Paul, not a single one of them? Yes. Right. Are you saying, right? Is Paul saying that, no matter what, right? The none of, right, the owner of the ship, the centurion, the soldiers, the crew members, Paul's team, right, can well are going to die. That is not possible. Is that what Paul just said? Yeah. Is that how we are to understand what Paul said? Is that, yeah? Now listen very carefully, whether that is so or not. Come with me to verse 30. Look at verse 30. And as the shipmen, you know, shipmen, those are crew members, those are the sailors now. And as the shipmen were about to flee, listen carefully, out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea under color, that means it was a disguise, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. So they were all on a mother boat or a mothership, and now the crew members were letting down ever so secretly, right, a small boat on which they could escape. Are you following me now? So shipmen were about to flee. Verse 30. Look at verse 31. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye, that word ye means all of you cannot be saved. So look at that one more time. So it says, except the word ye there, okay, means all of you. Yeah. So something is going to happen to the community on that ship. Yeah. Something is going to happen to the community on that ship. Let me say one more time. Observe it very closely. Yeah. It says in verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship. I want you to get this, right? Except these ones. So who are these ones? These ones that want to run away. Except they abide, except they remain, except they stay on this ship, we cannot be saved. In other words, what does that mean? Paul is saying now that the action of the shipmen can affect the safety, right, of the owner of the ship, the centurion, the many soldiers, the crew members, Paul's team, and all that. Do you understand? The action of a shipman, right, can affect the safety of, right, all those other people, right, or of the owner, of the centurion, of the soldiers under him, of the crew members, of Paul's team even, right? Now, so listen very carefully though. Yeah. Why is that? It's not difficult to work it out. People have been in the middle of a storm, a very bad, deadly storm. Now, some people that are the people that know how to maneuver the ship, because the shipmen are those that know how to maneuver the ship, right? So don't forget. So the shipmen are the natural experts, okay, who know how to control the ship. Yes. So the shipmen, they know how to control the ship. If people see them, right? So if people see the shipmen who are the natural experts who know how to control the ship, yeah, if they see them abandoning the ship, what will people do? Right? What will happen is the action of these shipmen, yeah. So or let's call it crew to make it easier. So the action of the crew, right? So the action of the shipmen might stir a reaction of panic that might cause stampede. Yeah. So a reaction of panic is very much like you're on a plane and then the pilot is about to jump out of the plane and we are like 33,000 feet in the air. And everybody on the plane knows that the captain is about to jump out. What are they going to do? People are going to start acting erratic and weird. Understandably so. So, but listen very carefully. Yeah, in verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship. That means, except these experts, these shipmen, these crewmen, these guys that are the sailors, the guys that understand the sea and the boat and the ship, except they abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. In other words, we need their expertise. Their natural expertise is needed. Yeah. So are you following now? So it means that the natural expertise, okay, of the shipmen is needed. Yeah. The natural expertise of the shipmen is needed by everyone, okay, on that ship. Can you see? That is not magic. Yeah. So the ship is a vessel, is a vehicle. There are rules for maneuvering, captaining, right, steering, controlling that vessel. If the people that know how to control it are not there, Paul is saying, hey, nobody's going to be saved. Okay. Now, so what do we then say? This is Paul that had said, yeah. Look, remember, Paul had said in verse 20, uh, um, in verse 22. Paul has said in verse 22, watch carefully. So Paul has said in Acts 27:22, what had he said? Now I exhort you, be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life. No loss of any man's life. So that means no loss of any man's life, right, is a conditional statement. It's a conditional prophecy. Although when Paul said it, it will look like it's not conditional. Yeah. So do you get it now? So when Paul said it, it looks so final. There shall be no loss of any man's life among you. Yeah. So when Paul prophesied, okay, yeah, it sounded unconditional. But Paul's statement in speaking up in verse 31, go to verse 31 now. Yeah, 31. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. So, in other words, Paul's statement was really conditional. Yeah. So, in other words, Paul's action, listen very carefully now, Paul's action of speaking up was needed. In other words, let's play it again. Yeah. Paul had prophesied, yeah, that there shall be no loss of lives. Acts 27:22. Right? Paul had prophesied. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. What had he prophesied? No loss of any man's life. Follow me closely. Yeah. Then men wanted to abandon, right? Wanted to abandon the ship. Okay. What if Paul just kept quiet? So if Paul was silent, what will happen? There will be loss of lives, plenty. You see now, there will be loss of lives, plenty. Now, so that tells us then that in order for Paul's prophecy in Acts 27:24 that says no loss of any man's life. Listen to you one more time, right? So in order for the fulfillment, okay, so in order for the fulfillment of Acts 27:24 that says, oh, no loss of any man's life, right? What needed to happen? Paul had to speak up. Yes, Paul had to take the action. Yeah, so Paul he had to take the action of speaking up. Otherwise, right, Acts 27:24 will not be fulfilled. Yes. So if Paul had not spoken up, if he hadn't spoken up, if he had just said, well, I've already prophesied, there shall be no loss of lives. If he didn't speak up, what would then happen is there will be loss of lives. And it will not be that he was a false prophet when he said there will be no loss of lives. It is that people don't know how to listen to and understand genuine prophecy. Let me say it again, right? So if Paul had not spoken, yes, if he had not spoken, then, right, Acts 27, verse 24, that says there shall be no loss of any man's life, right, will not be fulfilled. Do you understand now? So that prophecy says, "Oh, no loss of any man's life." It won't be fulfilled at all, right? So when it says, for example, come back with me in that Acts 27. I want to show you something. Um, Look at verse 24. It says, God had given thee all them that sail with thee. Can you see? God has given thee all them that sail with thee. Right? So the prophecy is in Acts 27:22. I know I've been saying 24. It's 22 already. 22 is where it says, there shall be no loss of any man's life among you. Yes? That's Acts 27 and verse 22. There will be no loss of life. There will be no loss of life. Yeah, it even says in verse 24, God has given you. Yeah, so it says God has given you all of them that sail with thee, right? But that God has given you, what was to be Paul's reaction? Paul needed to take certain actions when it was demanded, like speaking up. Yes, so these demanded, right, that Paul, right, would need to take some action. Yeah, you need to take some action. In other words, it is quite troublesome then when we hear prophecy and it's assumed that the prophecy will just bring itself to come to pass, and it's a personal prophecy. Now, look at it again. Look at Acts 27, right? So, and verse 31. Paul said to the centurion, except this abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. 32. Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So who now acted? Well, Paul acted in verse 31. Then the soldiers acted. Yeah, the soldiers. So Paul acted. Then the soldiers acted. The soldiers acted. What did they do? They acted to prevent the escape of the shipmen. What would that cause? Once the shipmen don't escape, then that will be how there will be a preservation of the lives of all those on that ship. You see it now. Observe one more time again. Observe again that Paul did not just talk. Yeah, so we can say that Paul spoke, but Paul did not just speak. Observe what Paul did very carefully in Acts 27:31. Paul said to let's go back again. Look at verse 30. 27:30. And as the shipmen were about to flee. So, in other words, the crew members, okay, the crew members were about to flee. So they were taking their own actions. They were about to flee. Then in Acts 27:31, right, who did Paul speak to? Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers. So Paul did not speak to the crew members. Observe that. He did not speak to the crew members. Yeah, he spoke to the centurion. That's very important. Why? Because the centurion, right, will have the authority to do something about the crew members, right? So the centurion, right, using the soldiers, could turn the action of the crew members around. Let me say it again. The centurion, using his soldiers, right, can change the actions. You see now? So it can change the actions of the crew members. This is important. Paul did not at that time start go on his knees to pray. He knew that the action, the corresponding action to bring about fulfillment was to talk to men along the lines of influence. You see now? So Paul spoke to men along the lines of influence. Yeah, he spoke to men along the lines of influence. Paul did not speak to the crew members. He didn't go to the crew members to say, you guys, don't do that. It's just going to become a quarrel. It's going to become a fight. It's going to become a tussle. Paul doesn't carry authority on that ship. But Paul, located influence, and the highest influence that could stop the crewmen was the centurion. So he spoke to the centurion, who will use his soldiers to stop the crewmen. Anyway, now, so look at verse, I'm going to go all the way down now. Let's go to verse 34. Let's go to verse 34. It says, Look at verse 33 actually. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, that means to eat food, saying, this day is the 14th day that you have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Can you see now? So it now says in verse 34, wherefore I pray you, that means I'm begging all of you to take some meat. That means eat some food. That meat, right, was physical. Yes, it was physical food. Okay, so Paul says, hey, take some meat, for this is for your health. Yeah, so eat meat, right, for your health. What does that mean? Wait. If you check Acts 27 and verse 22, what had Paul said? Go back to verse 22. Verse 22 had said, for there shall be no loss of any man's life. That's a prophecy. No loss of any man's life. Yes? Paul is effectively saying, hey, guys, it is not that prophecy alone, right? Physical food, eating physical food is necessary. Yes? So eating physical food, right, is necessary, right, to stay healthy. Because, of course, if they don't eat, then of course, today, we will say that their immunity, right, it becomes depleted, right? Yeah, any sickness can take them out, can just kill them at sea. Yeah, so any sickness could then kill them at sea, and it will look like Paul's prophecy was a lie, but it's not. It's just that there was natural activity like eating normally that the people were. But you know what is funny? Paul did not say in Acts 7:22, right? He didn't say in Acts 27, verse 22. Yeah, for as you eat and you eat your food normally and you eat healthy food, you will then stay healthy and there will not be no loss to any man's life among you. No. Right? So Paul did not, right? He did not say anything, right, about eating to stay healthy. He didn't say anything about eating to stay healthy. But why does he not to say that? It is implied. It is implied. Prophecy is spoken within a context. Do you understand? So prophecy is spoken, right, within a context, right? And we must not ignore this. Yeah, it's like the people. What if they stop sleeping and they don't sleep for 14 days? They will start hallucinating. They will start jumping off the ship. They will jump to their deaths, right? So if they don't sleep, okay. So if they don't sleep, if they don't eat, all the normal things they should do, right? They can get delirious, right? They can get into all manner of confused activity. Yeah, disorientation because their body is beginning to eat itself. Yeah, so if they didn't sleep, if they didn't eat, then they can get into a confused psychology. Yeah, that might mean that they then jump off the ship. They jump off the ship, right? And they will die. They will die. Although Paul said there will be no loss of life, they will lose lives by not eating, not sleeping. So there are some natural things that they should do. Let me say it again, right? That is Acts 27 and verse 30. I was in verse 33. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, them all, saying, this day is the 14th day that you have tarried and continue fasting, having taken nothing. 34. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. For there shall not, look at it one more time, for there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you. So in other words, Paul is effectively saying in Acts 27 and verse 34, no hair will fall. Yeah, no hair will fall, right? Actually requires that you eat, right, and stay healthy. You see now. So, in other words, that statement, no air will fall, does not mean that don't worry, no matter what you do or don't do, everything is intact. No, that is a fatalistic, magical way of hearing and listening to prophecy. That's not the way the word of God is. Now, look at this one more time. Look at this one more time. What else do we see? Once again, Paul spoke up. He spoke up to give them instructions. In other words, what we see then is this. What we see then is this: that when words of prophecy, right, are spoken, okay, we get more detail, right? We get more detail with time. So there's a detail of don't abandon sheep. There's a detail of eat some food to stay healthy. Yes. So all those details, right, when acted on together. So when these are acted on together, there is fulfillment of the prophecy. So in other words, let's look at verse 35. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread. Acts 27, verse 35. Paul himself took bread. 27, verse 35. So that means Paul, right, had a body, a physical body. So Paul had a physical body, right, that needed food. Yeah, a physical body that needed food. He had that. He must know that. So what did he do? He took bread, gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. When he had broken it, he began to eat. Can you see now? So Paul's action was how he himself, right? Yeah. So this is how Paul receives fulfillment. Yeah. So this is how he will receive fulfillment of the word that said, "Not one hair on your body will be shall fall off." Acts 27:34. Yeah. So it was for the fulfillment of the word of prophecy in Acts 27, verse 34. Not a single hair will fall off. Now, let's go on. So in verse 36, then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. So Paul ate. That was his action. So what did we just see? We saw that Paul spoke. Then Paul ate. Then other people ate because Paul ate. So they ate inspired by Paul, right? So they are inspired by Paul's action. Now, what would then be the result? They will be healthy, right? So thus they will be healthy, right? As per Acts 27, right? And verse 34. I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. Yes, right? For there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you. Yeah. So Acts 27:34. How did it come? How will it be fulfilled? Paul will eat, and the others will see him eat. Then they will take comfort from his eating, and they will eat too. Now look at verse 38. 38 says, it says, if I look at verse 37, and we were in all in the ship 216. That means 276 people. Acts 27, verse 37. Right? Acts 27, verse 37. So Acts 27, verse 37, that was 276 men were on that ship. So we are reading how were the lives of 276 men preserved. Yeah. So how was the life, right? So how was the life of 276 men? Yeah, how was it preserved? Somebody will say, well, it's because Paul prophesied. Well, that's part of it, but that's not all of it. Paul's prophecy was to actually cause them to have hope. And in their hope, they will remember there are other actions that they were to take, like eating, like staying on board, like not causing a stampede, like not causing a riot, okay, now, or panicking. Look at verse 38. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. So, verse 38, they lightened the ship. Why? They needed to travel light in order to give themselves a chance to stay alive. Yeah. So, are you seeing now? So, they were to give themselves a chance of staying alive. Look at all the actions that went into no hair on your head shall be lost. You see now? So they ate until they were full. So they ate healthily, they recovered their strength. Then, when they had eaten, they knew that the ship was heavy, too heavy to guarantee safety. So they threw the excess load into the sea so that they could travel light. And all of this was Paula the perception, Paula the angelic word. You see now, so this is how people responded to the prophet word of prophecy. Look at verse 42. And I want to say something else again. Verse 42. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. Let me say it one more time. The soldiers' counsel. So that means the soldiers had agreed. Yes. So the soldiers had agreed to kill the prisoners. You see now, they had agreed to kill the prisoners. Yeah, agreed to kill the prisoners. Wait. But look at Acts 27:34 again. 34 says, I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you. Look at verse 22. 22 says, and I read, it says, I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any life. You see, no loss of any life. So although Acts 27, and verse 22, right, said, prophesied no loss of life, right, no loss of any life. That means no prisoner, right, will die. Yes. Yet in Acts 27:42, soldiers had agreed to kill the prisoners. So, in other words, if the soldiers take that action, then they prevent the fulfillment. Okay, they prevent the fulfillment of Acts 27 and verse 34, Acts 27 and verse 22. You see now, what I want you to see is the fact that the fulfillment of prophecy, okay, does not mean that men have their brains and their manners and their fears suspended. Yeah, so it does not suspend the way people think. Yeah, it doesn't suspend the way people think, or doesn't remove from people the power to think. Yes, it doesn't. Well, men think still. So, but look at what it says here in verse 43, and I stop now. 43. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, commanded. Yeah. So look at what happened here. So the centurion, he did his part. He took his action. Why? Well, to guarantee Paul's safety, to bring about Paul's safety. So Paul's safety is in the centurion taking his command, or the centurion assuming the most influential role. So if the centurion, are you following up? If the centurion had not taken charge, what will happen? Paul would be killed, right? And other prisoners, other prisoners too. Although the prophecy had said there will be no loss of life, then there will be a loss of life. So what would bring the loss of life, right, is the actions of men. Okay. So when Paul had prophesied in verse 22 that there will be no loss of life, it means men will not act, in ways that end the lives, of other men. So because if they do, then lives of men will be lost. Well, guys, it's been a privilege to bring you the word of God tonight. Thank you for your patience with me. Sit down with somebody, go over the territory that we covered tonight. And don't forget that together, you and I will take the gospel to the ends of the earth. Right?